Bungee jumping is sold as pure thrill, a controlled fall, a rush of adrenaline, and the guarantee you'll rebound safely. But when the rope fails, that promise shatters. In this video, we look at 6 of the most terrifying bungee jumping deaths ever recorded, each showing how one mistake with a cord can be fatal. It was July 18, 2015 in Madrid, Spain. The summer air hung heavy over the city, but outside its edges, where the land broke into cliffs and rivers, crowds gathered for the thrill of bungee jumping. Among the tourists lining up, 23-year-old Natalia Lopez stood on the platform, smiling nervously while trying to mask her hesitation. What began as a birthday celebration would end in a catastrophic mechanical failure. Natalia had just graduated with a degree in communications. Friends described her as reserved and practical, someone who liked to plan rather than act impulsively. She wasn't known for extreme sports, but she often went along with dares in social settings to avoid seeming distant. That day, she agreed to join friends for a bridge jump, something she never would have chosen on her own. Her parents had raised her conservatively, and she still lived at home, saving money while considering job offers. Taking risks wasn't her habit, but the pressure of the group, combined with the festive mood, pushed her toward the edge. Literally. The bungee setup appeared simple, but relied on equipment that had seen seasons of heavy use. A harness was clipped into a main cord with a large, industrial-grade carabiner, which was supposed to be double-checked before the participant leapt. The operators worked with practiced speed, but the repeated stress of jumps and exposure to the elements had, unknown to them, taken a toll on their gear. That afternoon, the group approached the platform one by one. Natalia lingered at the back, fidgeting with her straps. Her friends cheered her on, clapping and chanting her name. The operator crouched at the gear station, attaching her clip. He gave her a thumbs up and shouted that she was clear to jump. Her friends said she hesitated briefly, gripping the railing. Looking back toward the camera one of them held, she gave a small, uncertain smile and said, "Okay, here I go." Those words caught on the recording were her last. She pushed off, arms spread wide. There was a sharp metallic ping that few recognized at first. Witnesses later described the sickening sight of the rope whipping away from her ankles as she fell, the carabiner snapping cleanly at the gate. The rope offered no resistance. Gasps turned to screams as the reality became clear. The fall was swift, but the impact was devastating. Natalia hit the rocky riverbed with a sickening crack, her body folding unnaturally on the uneven stone. The sound carried up to the platform, cutting through the screams before everything fell into stunned silence. One bystander later said the stillness afterward was worse than the scream, that the way she didn't move at all was unbearable. At the railing, her friends collapsed, some sobbing uncontrollably, others shouting in disbelief at the staff. The operator stood frozen, staring in horror at the broken piece of metal still clutched in the rigging. One of her friends called for help. Emergency responders arrived quickly, navigating the rocky banks to reach her. Efforts to revive her were brief and unsuccessful. The water carried fragments of dust and blood downstream, an image that haunted witnesses. Her funeral was held in her hometown, with classmates, relatives, and neighbors filling the small church. The coffin was closed, her parents inconsolable, while friends who had been with her struggled to speak through their grief. Spanish authorities immediately shut down the bungee site and launched a full investigation. They mandated a complete overhaul of all equipment and rigorous new inspection protocols. Investigators emphasized the lethal consequence of metal fatigue, noting that a single critically weakened component had ended a young life. It was September 9, 2017 in Colorado. The air was clear and sharp, the kind of late summer day that still carried warmth but warned of colder weeks ahead. At the edge of an abandoned mining site, a group gathered for a private bungee session. The cliffs stood high and imposing, their jagged faces reminders that risk here carried no margin for error. Daniel Price, 28, had signed them up. A mechanic in Denver, he was known for chasing challenges after long weeks in the shop. Friends described him as the one who always volunteered first, whether it was snowboarding, off-roading, or rafting. He thrived on showing courage, joking that fear only meant you'd have a better story later. Co-workers said he often pressed them to join him, and this jump was no exception. He saw it as proof that they could all push their limits. The site itself had been repurposed from an old mine, its platforms rigged with reinforced steel beams and elastic cords. Standard bungee operations require careful rope measurement. The cord must be calculated precisely to keep the jumper clear of the ground, while allowing enough stretch for the free fall. Operators usually double-check lengths, especially when moving equipment between sites of different heights. Here, the canyon floor lay uneven, strewn with rock piles and dirt from decades of excavation. The margin for error was slim. That morning, Daniel insisted on going first. His two co-workers, less eager, agreed to watch from behind the rail. The operators clipped his harness, tightened straps, and secured the rope. Witnesses later said the check seemed rushed, the workers distracted by chatter among the small group. Daniel leaned over the edge, shouting jokes about testing it for the rest of you. The countdown began. Then Daniel launched himself outward, arms wide, his scream echoing. For an instant, everything looked normal. The cord stretched, slowing his descent, but then it kept stretching. Those watching saw the rope extend farther than expected, longer than the clearance allowed. The impact came fast and brutal. Daniel slammed chest first into the rocky ground, his body folding with the force. A sharp crack echoed through the canyon, followed by silence. His co-workers screamed, one collapsing to his knees and vomiting. The operators scrambled to cut the cord loose, but it was clear immediately that the injuries were catastrophic. Witnesses said Daniel never moved after the strike. Dust rose from the canyon floor as staff rushed down the path, waving others back, telling them to call for emergency services. His friends clung to each other at the railing, sobbing and shouting his name, their earlier excitement gone in an instant. Emergency crews arrived within minutes, but there was nothing to be done. The site was taped off as investigators questioned shaken onlookers. The rope, still attached, lay stretched against the rocks, a visible marker of the miscalculation that had ended the jump in disaster. His funeral in Denver was quiet. Co-workers from the garage spoke briefly, remembering his energy and persistence, struggling to reconcile that the man who urged them into adventure had died in one. Colorado state regulators launched an inquiry and shut down the mining site jump permanently. Their report cited improper rope measurement and insufficient safety oversight, mandating stricter standards for all private bungee operations in the state. It was August 14, 2016, at Victoria Falls, where the Zambezi River plunged into the gorge below. The morning began like any other at the bungee platform. Tourists lined up, phones in hand, waiting to throw themselves into the 364-foot drop. Guides joked and reassured nervous jumpers, but the roar of the water below carried its own warning. For some, the experience would be nothing more than adrenaline. For Erin Walsh, it would end in tragedy. Erin was 32, an Irish nurse from Cork who had worked double shifts for months to save for her trip across Africa. Friends described her as practical, steady, not someone who sought danger. Yet this journey was different. She had told her colleagues she wanted a memory to tell forever, something to mark her year away from the wards. Traveling with two companions she had met in Kenya, she let herself be talked into activities she might normally avoid, the bungee jump being the boldest of all. The setup at Victoria Falls looked professional. Staff wrapped jumpers in heavy harnesses at the waist and ankles, attaching them to thick elastic cords designed to recoil safely. Tourists were instructed to keep arms wide and legs straight to avoid twisting mid-air. The equipment was advertised as inspected daily, but the reality was that gear was reused repeatedly under high demand. A single weakness in stitching or a rushed strap adjustment could mean disaster. That morning, the platform was busy. Erin and her two companions paid for their turns, waiting as tourists ahead of them screamed, bounced, and were pulled back up. Erin clapped to encourage those who hesitated, though she admitted she was nervous. One companion whispered that they would buy her a drink after, whether she jumped or not. But Erin shook her head. She wanted to do it. to prove to herself she could. When her turn came, she stepped forward slowly. A staff member fitted straps around her ankles and waist. Witnesses later recalled one ankle strap hung slightly loose, but the workers moved quickly, waving her toward the edge. The guide gave the count and Erin leapt, arms stretched, her scream mixing with the roar of the falls. At first, the cord stretched as expected. Then, halfway through, the crowd gasped. The ankle harness tore free, one strap slipping off completely. Erin's body jolted, spinning out of control, no longer tethered. Shrieks erupted on the platform as she fell past the intended rebound point, her figure tumbling toward the jagged rocks at the river's edge. Her companions screamed her name over and over. A South African tourist who recorded the jump dropped his phone in shock as the impact echoed faintly up the gorge. Erin did not move. Staff scrambled but stood frozen for moments, staring at the slack cord swaying above the gorge, before rushing for radios and ropes. Rescue teams later reached her body along the riverbank. She had sustained catastrophic injuries on impact, and attempts to resuscitate her were futile. The recording showed the moment the strap failed, clear evidence of equipment weakness that had gone unnoticed. Her funeral in Dublin drew colleagues from the hospital, who remembered her as hardworking and kind, their grief heavy but quiet. Family asked for privacy. Her coffin closed, the service simple. Zimbabwean authorities issued a statement promising stricter inspections of harnesses and ropes. Tours resumed weeks later like nothing happened. It was April 6, 2018 in Macau, a clear spring afternoon that carried the kind of restless energy holidays often bring. At the base of the Macau Tower, tourists lined up for their chance to leap from one of the tallest commercial bungee platforms in the world. Music played faintly from speakers, cameras flashed, and groups of young people laughed to hide their nerves. Above, the wind pressed against the steel frame of the tower, strong enough to rattle loose signs. Few in line thought about it, but conditions that day carried more risk than usual. Kevin Zhang, 21, stood among his classmates from Guangzhou. A second-year economics student, he was considered easygoing and agreeable, often following rather than leading. Friends said he was not drawn to extreme sports, but peer pressure swayed him easily. This holiday trip was meant to be lighthearted. Photos, sightseeing, a few dares to push their comfort zones. Kevin hesitated when his classmates signed up for the jump, but their jokes about him always playing it safe finally nudged him forward. He wanted to prove he could join in. The Macau Tower jump relied on specialized gear, a long elastic cord measured for each jumper's weight, secured with a harness system around the ankles and torso. The fall reached over 700 feet, with rebound arcs carefully planned to clear the tower's vertical supports. Operators depended on weather reports and real-time observation, as strong winds could push a jumper off course. On calmer days, the system worked smoothly. On gusty ones, the risks increased dramatically. That afternoon, gusts picked up intermittently, enough to sway flags on the platform railings. Some staff muttered about waiting, but with a long line of paying tourists, the jumps continued. Kevin's group had already cheered for two classmates who completed their leaps. Cameras captured Kevin smiling faintly as he adjusted the harness, his hands gripping the straps longer than necessary. One operator gave the standard instructions: "Step forward, don't hesitate, keep the body straight," and Kevin nodded quickly. He edged onto the platform, looking down at the city skyline and the Pearl River Delta beyond. From below, classmates shouted encouragement, raising their phones to film. The countdown began and Kevin pushed off, his body cutting through the air. For a moment, it looked like every promotional video. Free fall, adrenaline, the cord stretching. Then, as he rebounded, a crosswind caught him mid-arc. The gust shoved his body sideways. Instead of clearing the tower's frame, he swung into one of the lower steel beams. Witnesses later described a sickening thud that echoed through the gorge below. The impact knocked him limp, his head lolling unnaturally as the bungee cord recoiled. Gasps rippled across the crowd, classmates screaming and clutching each other. Operators rushed to reel him in, but his body dangled motionless. Classmates sobbed openly, some collapsing at the platform rail. Staff worked in strained silence, aware of the severity even before Kevin was pulled back up. The festive atmosphere at the tower dissolved, leaving only cries, sirens from an ambulance that was called by the staff, and the wind that had caused the disaster. Kevin's funeral in Guangzhou was subdued, attended by relatives, classmates, and professors. His university quietly canceled a holiday outing scheduled the following month, citing respect for the grieving family. In Macau, authorities suspended bungee operations for several weeks. New wind sensors were installed, and stricter limits were introduced, forbidding jumps during gusty conditions. It was December 17, 2016, in Queensland, Australia. The summer heat pressed heavy over the coast, cicadas buzzing in the trees near a small adventure park outside a tourist town. Families gathered for rides and water attractions, but the main draw for the young crowd was the bungee platform set over a shallow inlet. That afternoon, dozens of phones were raised, ready to record. None of them expected the jump to end in silence. Liam O'Connor was 19, a trade apprentice from Brisbane. He had a reputation among his friends as the one who kept the mood up, always volunteering for dares or jokes. Apprenticeship hours left him drained, but weekends were his escape. Music, drinking, or stunts that made him seem larger than life. His parents worried about his impulsive streak, though he dismissed it as normal youth. To him, risk was part of proving himself. The park's bungee setup was modest compared to larger operators. The jump was advertised as casual thrill with flexible options, including tandem jumps meant to appeal to couples or friends. The system used a reinforced cord secured to an overhead rig, designed to stretch and rebound within safe limits. But unlike stricter operators, the park relied on basic weight estimates rather than calibrated scales, and water beneath the platform was only a few feet deep, meant for visual effect, not cushioning. That morning, Liam and a female friend booked the tandem option. He joked with staff, insisting he'd pull her down faster, asking another friend to film from the deck. Their combined weight wasn't precisely measured. Instead, staff did a rough calculation and clipped them into one cord. A few of Liam's friends teased him for showing off, but he only laughed, waving off their concerns. The countdown began. Spectators leaned against the railing, cameras raised. Liam shouted as he leapt, pulling his partner with him. For a moment, it looked like every other jump, arms flung wide, bodies accelerating toward the water. But within seconds, people on the platform noticed the cord stretching further than normal, pulling them dangerously close to the surface. Instead of bouncing, the cord bottomed out. Liam hit first, chest and head striking the water with devastating force. The sound carried up to the platform, followed by a shocked silence. His partner slammed down a moment later, screaming in panic as pain tore through her body. When the cord recoiled, Liam's arms hung limp, his body ragdolling against the straps. Staff scrambled, shouting orders, lowering the winch and calling for help. But the damage was immediate. Spectators gasped, some crying out as the injured girl sobbed his name, still strapped beside him. Later, a staff member admitted in a report that cord wasn't designed for two, and they knew it was close. Rescue crews rushed in, pulling both from the rig. His partner was rushed to hospital with multiple fractures and internal injuries. Liam, however, showed no signs of movement. Attempts at resuscitation failed, and he was declared dead at the scene. His funeral in Brisbane was subdued, with friends and family struggling to reconcile the loss with what had been meant as a weekend thrill. His parents described him as full of life, broken by the way it ended. Queensland inspectors moved quickly. The park was shut down, its license revoked, and tandem bungee operations were formally banned statewide. The case became a quiet but decisive example of lax oversight costing a life. It was June 16, 2018, in a secluded alpine gorge in Switzerland. The air was cool, the sound of rushing water echoing off steep rock walls. A group of office workers gathered on a makeshift wooden platform suspended high above the gorge, laughing and filming one another as they prepared for bungee jumps. It was meant to be a lighthearted weekend retreat, but beneath the chatter was an overlooked fragility. The structure itself had been built quickly for seasonal use, and its strength had not been tested under official oversight. Marcus Ritter, 27, stood quietly at the back of the group. An IT worker from Zurich, he was known in the office as reserved and dependable. He rarely sought out thrills and usually kept to himself. But when his manager organized the trip, Marcus signed up. He didn't want to be the odd one out, the colleague who sat aside while others bonded over a shared dare. Friends described him as cautious, the type to double-check his work and lock doors twice. But peer pressure had a quiet hold on him. The site was run by a little-known operator who promised cheaper, authentic experiences compared to the heavily regulated towers near Interlaken. The setup was simple: a wooden platform bolted into the cliff face, rebuilt each summer. Unlike permanent installations with steel reinforcement and regular inspections, this structure relied on seasonal labor and quick assembly. Harnesses and cords were real enough, but the staging area lacked railings and was supported by beams that creaked when too many people stepped on at once. That morning, the group of co-workers laughed as the first few jumps went smoothly. Marcus clapped politely, staying in the line that moved forward one by one. He joked nervously with a colleague, saying he hoped the rope was as reliable as our servers at work. Still, the unease in his voice was noticeable. Staff gave hurried instructions in a mix of German and English, but safety checks felt rushed. By the time Marcus's turn came, several people were crowded near the edge to film. A colleague suggested he smile for the camera before stepping up. Marcus adjusted his helmet and glanced at the harness still being prepared. Then came the sound that witnesses would never forget. A sharp crack, followed by the groan of splintering wood. The platform beneath Marcus gave way suddenly. Splinters flew as the support beams snapped in sequence, and before staff could clip the harness fully, the section collapsed. Marcus dropped through the gap, arms flailing for a second before vanishing into the gorge below. His co-workers screamed, some reaching instinctively toward him, others stumbling back in shock. The fall ended on jagged rocks beside the water, the impact echoing up the gorge. One witness later described it as, like stone crushing glass. Above, the unused rope and gear dangled uselessly, swaying in the wind. Staff stood frozen, unable to process what had happened. Within moments, shouting and chaos filled the platform as people backed away from the unstable edges. Rescue crews were called, but those who looked down knew immediately. Marcus lay motionless on the rocks, unreachable without climbing gear. Co-workers sobbed openly, some turning away from the edge, others clinging to one another. The sense of helplessness spread quickly. There was nothing anyone could do but wait for professionals to recover him. His funeral in Zurich a week later was quiet, attended by family, co-workers, and neighbors who struggled to understand why he had been at such a place at all. His parents, both retired teachers, sat silently through the service. Swiss regulators launched an investigation and quickly discovered the operator had no license to run the site. Prosecutors pressed charges, and the gorge facility was permanently closed. Authorities emphasized stricter enforcement on seasonal adventure companies, citing Marcus's death as an avoidable consequence of negligence. Thanks for watching. If these stories of thrill and sudden disaster entertained you, click here for more.